Thanks for joining us on PitchCon today. Dalton, Peter, how we doing?
Doing
Doing,
well.
doing
Glad to
good.
be here.
Good. Let's have some fun. It's an interesting title of a panel when I saw it, but it could be a lot of fun here for with all the metrics these days and all the different tools that are out there. We just had projections before, so for crying out loud, they're using all kinds of these things and what they're doing. We get the task of kind of using the go-tos because it always takes one or two stats, metrics, whatever we like to kind of start the digging in process on a player. And there's a go-to to see if it's worth doing so. So let's have a little fun with that. And we'll go hitters, we'll go pitchers, and we'll mix it around there. But start with you, Peter, on this one. On the hitter side of things, what's your go-to hitting metric as you begin to analyze players?
It's not batting average. I can say that. I can say that. I have a really simple approach. Nick or whoever put me on this panel, it's a good fit because I have an approach with all of these metrics that start out with the very simplest of the simplest of look, which is really looking at the basic component things, how much contact somebody makes, how much they walk, and for hitters, how hard they hit the ball, and those are things that show up right away on the Fangraphs dashboard page for each player, and you can very quickly get an idea of whether the player is patient or impatient, whether they swing and miss a lot, which is, not bad if you're a power hitter, but not good if you're not a power hitter. And so that's where I start with hitters, is if they strike out a lot but they walk a lot, that tells me one thing. If they strike out a lot and they don't walk very much, that tells me something very much different.
What about you, Dalton? What are you looking at when you're analyzing hitters?
Two things. First, my quick and dirty stat I usually go to is WRC plus. It's weighted and it adjusts for park, league context, and simply a stat that basically reflects the league's best hitters. So if you wanted me to go to one stat, that's usually the one I go to first. But kind of piggybacking the last panel, projections are the stat I use the most for hitters. Not so much pitchers, which we'll get to later, but yeah, I mean, I think these guys do more work than I ever could. And I'm simply, the projection systems take into all the factors. It's priced in. So I know it's kind of a boring answer, but WRC plus would be my one stat. But really, when I'm evaluating players, I just think these projection systems do the best job possible.
Yeah, and that's it's 100%. I think what a lot of us, I'll say a lot of us use projections, but like Peter's point as well is the I guess patience, impatience, basically plates discipline is a great way to see, because if they're not making contact, doesn't even matter really what we got going on there. So that's a great way to see where things go. But just for fun, Dalton, and if you don't want to say it, you don't have to. Which of the many projections are your favorite?
Yeah, well, I've been a Derek Carty since labor so many years. So BATX is my guy, but I mean, I'm using Steamer now. The BATX he's being lazy with his release date here.
Right.
Derek.
I'm glad you said it.
Yeah. But no, they're all good. ATC, any single one. Zips has been around forever, but right now I think I put in Steamer first. But I honestly don't have a huge preference other than the BATX. I do love how the still waiting for him to do it for pitching another. I think we're all waiting for, but taking in the StatCast factor in the BATX, adding in how hard the ball is hit that Peter brought up, that kind of separated itself. But I like Carty's system probably the best.
Yep, I can't argue that one at all. And I also agree with your point that when it comes to projections, and this maybe is just to us or a few people, I don't really care too much for pitching, but on hitting 100%. So I'm with you on that one. Let's do back to you, Peter, on this one. So you mentioned your kind of plate disciplines. You gave a little run through on that. Like, when you start looking at that, what makes you like maybe dive into another metric? What makes you like, if we think of like forks in the road, when you see a metric, if it's this way you go left, this way you go right. When you're looking at kind of your plate discipline metrics, what are you kind of trying to gain out of that, and where does it take you potentially?
I make player projections, and I think they're fantastically important. I use my own because
there you go.
Because it gives me an idea of what the player is capable of, what their baseline kind of thing is. But for analysis, I find you really want to find the places where the projections are wrong, where the projection, which is inevitably an averaging of a lot of the inputs going into it. You want to find the places where the player is going to take the next step up, where they're going to do better than the projection, or where something's going to go wrong and they're going to do worse than the projection because anyway, to get to your question, for me, I guess what I was going to get to was finding where the projections are wrong, finding where your expectation for the player is going to be different than what you would say is the goal. It's like finding, is this player potentially going to get better, or is this player potentially going to get worse? And that's the edge part of fantasy baseball analysis that I think matters the most, because you know where the players go, you know how much the players is expected to cost, or what round they're going to go for, you know, their ADP. You want to take the guys who are going to outperform expectations, and that means looking at guys who maybe had bad BABIP luck, or maybe had guys who pop out a lot, or guys who don't necessarily strike out a lot, but all of a sudden are popping up 20% of the time, and you realize that those homers that they're going for are coming at a cost that those things are in those numbers and how they change from year to year. BABIP for hitters isn't really is hitters have different BABIPs, but if you can see if somebody's usually at this level and they all of a sudden are way below their BABIP, all their regular measuring numbers go down, and a lot that's usually a measure of bad luck, and you want to find the guys who are going to bounce back from the bad luck issue.
Yeah, it makes a ton of sense, and like the BABIP stat, like you mentioned, the way you utilize the projections makes finding value is the key to a draft more often than not. So there's definitely a ton to that. Stickiness of metrics is always fun to decide what's sticky, what isn't, what we can utilize quick, what we can't. Dalton, when you're using your projections, Peter kind of mentioned how he goes about using them. How do you use the projections? I say when you use your metrics.
Sure. First, before I get to projections, I'll talk about WRC plus. Looking at that, say projected leaderboard. On one hand, you don't want to overrate it for fantasy. When you see Yandy Diaz is the 7th best projected WRC plus for Steamer this year because he doesn't contribute the homers, the steals that we want. And even then, you look at his launch angle. I think last year, after the first 2 months, it went back to the before. So he's going to help the Rays more with his on base percentage than fantasy. On the other hand, though, you go down a little lower and you see Tristan Casas and Vinny P as top 25 projected hitters in baseball this year, and they're going mid rounds. Vinny P's after the top 10 in 15-team leagues. So I think that's kind of eye opening as far as maybe the counting stats and their environment and all that for fantasy and the bags, but I think that just reveals to me a guy that's going to be good at baseball this year, and that'll be a good fantasy pick later. Okay, so as far as projections, the one thing to me that I always find the trickiest is playing time, because even like Cardi, I think he just has Fangraphs deal with a lot of that, and it's so hard to project rookies. I mean, a lot of it is really good if you projected it per 600 plate appearances. But we're all guessing, on playing time and a lot of this. So I'd say dealing with projections, looking at the projected playing time can be misleading in a couple ways. So that part is the trickiness with projections.
Yeah, the playing time is 100% the part that I know when we reviewed catchers on one of my shows, that was one of the positions you can really tinker with because they seem to project them pretty low. You mentioned rookies. Like if you can kind of nail that in some way or form, you definitely have an edge in the hitting side of things. And even the innings pitched, if you want to go pitchers as well. Peter, when you're looking at your metric, you kind of said you're looking for value. Is there anything specific? Are you looking? Do you see it benefits you more in power or speed, or is there a certain in-game roto stat where you're looking at your metrics that helps you kind of analyze better, or is it kind of all across the board?
It's kind of across the board. You want the countables. I mean, the countables are the ones that you can rely on as much as you can. Anything that if the playing time comes, the worst hitter is going to drive in 40 runs. It's not those are things you can rely on, and you're looking for the guys who produce more than that. the Vinny Pasquantino is an interesting one because he got sick last year and missed half the year, and he's being treated like he's a scrub, and it's pretty interesting that everybody forgot he was kind of a favorite player last year because he hits the ball pretty hard. He's not a big home run hitter, but he hits the ball hard, hits line drives, and makes a lot of contact. And I expect that by the time we get into the real drafting season, that ADP is going to move up quite a bit. And Tristan Casas is another one who has playing time issues. I mean, he didn't play against lefties a lot of the time in the second half last year. He's got defensive liabilities. His bat is good enough even against lefties that he should be playing every day. But if he loses at bats, all of a sudden a top 100 guy starts to look like he should maybe slip a little bit.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Dalton, like you kind of mentioned with WRC Plus, especially like an OBP guy or whatever, an average only guy for the most part outside of a little power early in the year with Yandy Diaz. Do you see your WRC Plus, because it is just weighted with ballpark factors and stuff you mentioned at the beginning, does it help you analyze maybe a certain statistic better than the others, or is it just kind of it all evens out in the end? Like it seems like, their steals guys are still high, power guys are still high. Does it kind of all work out for you?
Yeah, I'd say it's all encompassing. But to touch on Peter's point, which was a great one, is some of these you have to be wary of that they're just, say, a Jock Peterson. He might just be projected against all righties, so he's gonna look like this great, better hitter than he really is, and also only see 400 plate appearances. Hopefully, Casas gets a chance to do both. But some of those, and when you look at the leaderboards over like expected WOBA, some of those guys that are always up there every year, it's because they're platooning. But as far as WRC Plus, more just an encompassing stat for me. And then I cheat on the projections and sort by steals separately. I'd say, one's a hitter, and then the other steals. We all know is that we're all chasing steals no matter what in fantasy these days. And that's what I use specifically for projections, just sorting by projected stolen bases.
All right, so Dalton's sorting by steals, which makes sense. Especially last year, we saw the whole, boom with the new rules in play. Peter, since you do build projections, how are you accounting for steals after one season with the new rules?
So I saw somebody at First Pitch Arizona did it. It might have been Cardi, but did an interesting presentation about the expected how much people expected the steals to go up, and then how much they actually did go up. And it might not have been Cardi. Anyway, whoever did it showed pretty conclusively that the rate that the steals went up in the minor leagues when they changed the rules was how much the steals went up in the major leagues when they changed the rules. That's something we probably should have been on more last year. And in the second year after the rule change, the stolen bases went up again in the minor leagues a little bit, not nearly as dramatically, but I expect them to go up. And I've weighted them a little bit. My line before last season was, it doesn't really matter how much they go up if they go up the same for everybody. If they go up, like if I project somebody to steal 50 and they steal 70, but the guy I project to steal 40 steals 50, it's kind of the ratio stays the same. And I take those projections, I convert them, or the actual stats, and I convert them to dollar values, which means that I'm comparing the dollar value to the dollar value that people are paying in the 12-team auction, an AL or NL only auction. And so I have a baseline that I'm constantly comparing the players' actual value production to what they cost and what the expectations were about them. And that helps me navigate. That's not a simple thing unless you have my book. But if you to play along with me, but it's an easy way for me to see to kind of check the validity, the logic of the player evaluations that I'm giving. Is what did they do in the past, and how did they do compared to what other people thought they were going to do in the past, and how does that add up in looking at what's going to happen in the future?
Dalton, since you like to use projections, and just because everybody pretty much does, but I'll ask you, and not all projections are created equal. They all their secret sauce. They all do their little things differently. A lot of them will admit, again, not all, because I don't know what Peter's formula is, but a lot will say it's like they use some sort of a 3-year average, like weighted differently or whatever, but a lot will do that. How do you do anything? Do you care just because they made the projections? You just use the projections, or do you look at, say, a player that has only played 1 year, but now they have a projection, so it seems kind of faulty? Because I did a show with James Anderson. We were doing a bunch of like second-year players. So if you look at the projections, you're kind of sitting there looking at some that are like gaudy, some that aren't, that maybe should be gaudy, so on and so forth. How do you go about that when you're analyzing players?
Yeah, when I'm using park factors or writing about that, I love 3 years sample for that. But I guess I just appeal to authority and assume that they're taking all that into account and just hope so. But man, I get that rookies are just impossible to project, so when we all remember the ones that hit and we forget the ones that didn't. So I don't know, maybe you just got to go with your own feel more for the young guys and just realize that everyone's throwing their hands up when the sample's that small.
Yep, most definitely.
The reality of it is that the best projection for a guy who hasn't played in the major league is like 400 at bats at hitting 245 and hitting 8 home runs and driving in 50 runs. And if you do that for all rookies, you're going to get the best correlation.
That's fair.
But that doesn't help you very much in terms of identifying the best players. But it's Bill James proved that minor league stats matter, but they don't necessarily matter in the first year that a player plays.
Well, yeah, minor league stats are so skewed these days with different rules and balls and everything else. It's all over the board in that reality, which makes our quote unquote job even more entertaining each and every day, trying to predict this game we play.
Rest in peace, Bill James handbook, by the way. Sad to see that not there. I always use that for my park factors 3-year thing. So it's sad to see that go. Sorry, Bubba.
So what are you using now?
The Savant's good. Savant, you can do 3.
Savant's got a lot of stuff on there. 100%.
And you can do the handedness. I love the handedness and 3-year samples. That's pretty good.
Yeah, Savant has. If you know how to navigate Savant, that's a whole other podcast on itself, probably. But once you kind of figure that out, there is a lot there. I still haven't found out probably half of it, but there is I at least know the park factors page. I'm with you on that one. There's some good stuff there. Just for fun, and we won't go too deep into this, but before we get to the pitcher side, you mentioned Savant, so I'll just ask, because X stats is such a controversial term sometimes. Like, what should we trust? What shouldn't we trust? So, Peter, I'll start with you. You might not even use X stats, which is totally fine. But if you do use X stats, X WOBA, X average, whatever, how do you utilize that in your player analysis? Because some say it's crazy, some say there's not validity in certain parts, but there is in others. So it just depends on where you read, I guess.
I use them more in the storytelling, about telling the story about players. Like, I could say, oh, this guy hit 235. I think that was maybe Jake Rogers last year, but his expected batting average was 208, and the guy who strikes out 35% of the 35% of the time, 208 sounds a lot more natural to those skills than the 230. But that's a storytelling thing. I wouldn't say, oh, it's like he hit 208. He didn't. No. He hit 230. Yeah.
What about you, Dalton?
Yeah, it's more descriptive. Peter put it perfectly. But that said, I mean, sometimes you're in the middle of the year and you see a guy hitting the ball really hard and they happen to be finding gloves more, and the guy's due for regression. So, I mean, sure, absolutely useful at times. It's another piece to the puzzle, and it's awesome that we have all these different stats.
Yeah, there's so many of them. That's why it's just fun to, how do you narrow it down discussion? Before we go to pitchers, I'll let you guys plug your work, of course. So, Peter, starting with you, where can people find you and the work you have going on?
So I've got a Substack at rotoman.substack.com, and you can find out all my stuff there.
What about you, Dalton?
Follow me on Twitter at Dalton Del Don, and sign up at Yahoo. Baseball is open.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Yeah, I'm on Twitter at Brian Entrekin, and I have a million podcasts, so just follow me there, and I'll tweet them out to you. You'll see them one way or another. Let's go to the pitching side of it. We'll start with you this time, Dalton, because Yellow Brick Road himself is on the show. So I'm really curious how you get to those, the analysis behind that. What's your go-to pitching metric?
All right. So as I alluded to, not so much projections here, and it's no fault of their own, really. It's just that I think there's so much noise in ERA and to a lesser extent WHIP. So my go-to is K percentage, K rate, how much of the guys miss bats. It stabilizes the fastest. I think it's like 60 to 70 plate appearances, or I should say gets more stable, since stats never truly stabilize. So yeah, I'm a strikeout guy. And we can get more into the weeds on the Yellow Brick Road thing, but because of this, I guess it's a newer theory of how volatile these ERA and WHIP is. Trying a different strategy and attacking pitchers a little bit later, higher upside guys, and just we'll see where that ERA and WHIP lands. And we'll get more to the pitching thing, but I would say just K rate is the main thing, and then CSW I actually love. I think Nick doesn't love it as much as he used to, but
when it first came out,
I like giving credit for the called strikes. Maybe I'm a homer because I'm a Giants fan. I think Logan Webb deserves the credit because he's a leader in that category all year. But I like CSW, and I really do pay attention to that. So the ability to miss bats.
Yeah, 100%. What about you, Peter? What's your go-to metric?
Well, kind of the same thing. I think strikeout rate is huge. The best pitchers strike out the most guys, and there's no question about that. But a lot of guys who are not the best pitchers strike out a lot of guys and walk a lot of guys. And so the two in combination tell you almost everything you need to know about the type of pitcher that you're looking at. And then from there you can look at, basically you can say, is this a dominating pitcher or is this not a dominating pitcher? And once you've decided that, then you can look at BABIP and home run per fly ball and see if they were pitching with good luck or bad luck, or, is that 3.69 ERA like out of this world lucky, or is it a measure of what that guy's able to do? And I think it all builds off of strikeouts and walks.
Yeah, K to walk ratio is one of my favorite ones to look at. Basically, sums it all up in one nutshell, and you can see where it goes from there. And
I think strikeouts minus walks is percentage is actually, for me, it like tells me the number faster. The ratio is a little harder.
Yep, that's my favorite ratio. K to walk, K minus walk. It's awesome, and it basically encompasses everything you guys are saying. Like, this guy strikes out a lot of guys, doesn't walk a ton of guys. Like, it gives you the total package. Because if he doesn't walk a ton, but doesn't strike out a ton, he still has a decent K to walk, and we can get a good idea on the quality of the pitcher, or they're more of a pitch to contact pitcher, so on and so forth, and that makes things interesting. Dalton, what is it behind your metric that kind of gets you going in the pitchers department? And then, besides all the common sense, he strikes out a lot of guys, we're doing good, but where else are you going with that?
Yeah. Okay. So we've talked about the missing the bats, just how important that is. But so I'll just talk a little bit more into the pitching. While I do agree that pitchers control their BABIP, at the same time, I don't get overly concerned with the StatCast page as much for pitchers. I do think there are very good pitchers that give up hard contact, and that's not like a non-starter for me. I would concentrate more on the K percentage, and totally agree. K percentage minus walk percentage is probably the best way to look at how good of a pitcher, how good of a season he had. Now, Strider looks like the most dominant pitcher in baseball by far. He's an interesting topic himself, just because is it a skill, his inability to not give up home runs with runners on base. But to me, he's just so head and shoulders, and I expect that ERA to drop. So speaking of Strider, Rob Silver wrote a good article on this, but I used to in the past just say wins or, random, it's going to happen. And while they are to an extent random, I'm sorting the projected standings at Fangraphs and targeting pitchers, projected to have better than a 500 winning percentage. I really, the wins are shrinking throughout the league. Pitchers pitching deeper in the games is shrinking, more 6-man rotations. So wins are something that I'm taking more into consideration when I'm evaluating fantasy starters than I did in the past. And it was dumb not to, maybe all along, but I think you want to target, if there's certainly a tiebreaker, you want to pick a pitcher on a better team. But it's another part of the formula that I've taken into more consideration than I used to.
Yeah, I'm with you. It was a couple of years ago at FPAS when Rob gave the presentation there, and then he wrote the article this year for FTN. And it's like the common sense thing, like, obviously, let's do this. But he breaks it down, like you said, and shows a lot of evidence behind, like, hey, look at this, guys. It's really kind of glaring to an extent on what it is. And a great tiebreaker for sure. Like, I'm not going to push certain guys, X ahead of other pitchers a bunch for certain things, but I'm with you on the wins thing is much more, at least on the radar, than it used to be. So we used to always, I think, used to say, oh, you can't predict wins. Don't worry about it. Just take the guy with the talent. He's going to be okay. Well, you can't predict wins, so you can predict the guy that's going to be on a good team for more chances for wins. That's what you can't predict. So give yourself a chance. Peter, when you're looking at your metrics, where does it start to lead you in analyzing pitchers?
I guess I'm trying to find the guys who. My approach is, I don't worry about too much about the middle of the pack. I like identifying the aces, the guys who are have performed like aces in the past and who I think are going to perform like aces again in this coming year. I think every fantasy team needs at least one or two of those guys, and picking the wrong one is spending a lot of money for a guy who doesn't do well. And there were a lot of those last year, not necessarily often because of injuries, but there was a thinning of the ranks last year. And then I focus at the bottom of the list at the guys who are on good teams, who have good strikeout to walk ratios, or who also might have an expanded opportunity, and who aren't measuring, often 25, 26 years old, maybe have had a little trouble with walk rate, but who are coming into maturity, also have 3 good pitches as opposed to, I mean, I worry about Strider just because there's the 2 pitches are historically guys get caught up to, but so far it's worked. And so it's like the whole package is trying to find the cheap guys, the $2, $3, $4 guys to fill out your pitching staff, so that you can afford to have an ace and a top closer or a second ace, and build off of that with the cheap guys, and get a lot and collect a lot of them, so that because you're going to miss on some of them, but you're not paying much for them.
Definitely. Like we talked hitters earlier, it's pretty kind of, hitters in a bubble. Pitchers, now we have starters and we have relievers. So obviously there's metrics you want for like the guy that's going to go hopefully 6+ innings. Then you got the reliever, you kind of want to just throw gas and strike out as many guys as you can strike out. But they have a lot of volatility to them as time as well. Dalton, when you're looking at relievers, does your metrics change? Does your analysis you're looking at change to find a better reliever? Obviously, the good team thing comes into play there, but is there something else you might look at when it comes to relievers?
It's a great question. Yes, skills. Of course, you want skills top first and foremost, but oftentimes its role is more important. For instance, I was just in a draft and I decided to take Kenley Jansen over Evan Phillips and Clay Holmes, those types. I didn't feel good about it. He's old and he's in decline, but it feels like if Jansen's traded, he'll still be traded to be the closer. It might even be in LA and would take over for Phillips. So yeah, it's very different. And saves, I mean, as we heard Cardi talk about, it's his least favorite for projections. It's really tough. So yeah, in my ranking this year, I found myself bumping up roll. I mean, Tanner Scott was amazing last year and he could get 100 Ks again. But a little bit less confident he keeps that role. And relievers also, they're time and again come out of nowhere for a year or two and then flame out. So these boring guys like the Jansen, I'm all over Kimbrel this year because he has the role in a good team, and I know his ERA could, be 5 or 2, but still the great price. Exactly. So it's a good debate here talking saves, because it's a tricky one and they're so important in these a lot of leagues we play in, and especially the draft and holds. But yeah, my long answer to shorten it up is role you have to pay attention to almost more so than skills.
Yeah, and this past year, especially in the saves department, going into last year, there's only like X amount of guys we were really confident in, all these things. And then you had a bunch of teams on platoons. Well, we've already looked at how last year turned out. A ton of guys just kept their jobs, a lot of 20+ save guys. So that makes the pool a little different on draft day, but do we still feel confident in that pool? Hence your Kenley, like your bubble you were talking about there. Peter, are you similar in your approach on relievers? Does it change like that compared to starters, or do you still kind of analyze a certain statistic or metric potentially for relievers / closers?
I'm terrible with closers. I so many times I've just ended up with no closer because I keep saying, I can't pay that. I try to push for the haters and the guys who are going to strike out 100 guys who are, like almost bad starter numbers in 65 innings. And so I'm very conservative about it. I think it's like, it just feels terrible to spend your $20 on some guy who is got the role and then loses the role because he has a bad 2 weeks. And it doesn't always happen. And it doesn't always do my team a benefit to the way I approach it, but it's but I'll call it an Achilles heel. It's not. It's not. So basically, yeah, my analysis is they're always overpaid because their role seems surer than it is, and so I always want to spend less.
It's relievers is might seem boring to some because you only play a couple days a week and inning here and inning there, but like Dalton it said, and Peter, you said there's such a volatile role to our game we play, and roles are there if it's like one injury and then this happens, or if they struggle a little bit and they're on a mediocre team, then this happens. Like there's a whole lot of volatility in the position outside of a select few barring injury.
And head to head, I find myself punting them. It seems
I'm with you.
That's what I usually. That's the strategy in head to head.
I'm almost at the point in any standalone league, even in Roto, if it's not like an overall competition,
right.
Maybe not punt so much, but I'm definitely just going to wait, and I'll start waiting in the Kimbrel, Holmes, Jansen, Tanner Scott world, and whatever it is, and see where it is. But like I see Peter's point, it's very annoying trying to bid on them in fab all the time. That is just like the worst thing in the world when it comes to relief pitching. So that's where relievers is challenging. When you guys are looking at pitchers now, I know I've been asking you about your metrics and everything, but let's just have fun because most of us play Roto. Not all. There's head to head. There's a lot of us play a Roto format, and WHIP is a category that is getting talked about more now than it used to. But it kind of always felt like it was like the runs of the hitting department. Like he's like took it for granted almost. But there's some great pitchers like back in the day. Castillo was good, Luis Castillo, but his WHIP was horrible. And some people overlooked it. Some like, okay, that's why I can't draft him. Dalton, when you are looking at your pictures, and it could be just a tiebreaker situation per se, but how much are you taking WHIP into consideration when kind of, I guess, making your rankings or something like that?
Yeah, I would give more weight to the WHIP projections than I would ERA because I think it's probably a better reflection of this strikeout and walkout rate and less to do with balls in play, which can just or even home runs. Fly balls turn into home runs. Far more fluctuating ERA. I almost just totally ignore ERA. So I agree with you that WHIP has been underrated for years. Darvish is really curious. Does anyone know his health on his arm? Because he could be such a good pick where he's going right now if healthy, and he's a WHIP helper forever. But I'm with you on this. It's an underrated stat equal to runs on the offensive side that should be paid. It's more projectable than ERA. So twofold here.
So to that question, then, are you using any metrics to project it? Is it more just like, hey, like this year, like a consistency basis? What are you putting together to kind of build that more projectable WHIP feeling?
I'll let Peter answer that one. He does his own. So
Peter does it first. There you go, Peter. Perfect segue.
So the thing that is pretty stable, it fluctuates a little bit. Walk rate is stable. WHIP is kind of the opposite of on base percentage for hitters, and for those of us who advocate playing with on base percentage rather than batting average, the argument is that the walk rate is pretty consistent. Hitters, pitchers, they have capability, and they live up to that capability most of the time, unless something has gone wrong. Hits fluctuate, and for both hitters and pitchers. So for the walks, I just estimate the walks. I feel confident about that. For the hitting, I combine the estimated stats, the XBA and the hit rate, and combined with BABIP, and come up with a number that I think is a reasonable middle line for what a hitter is going to be able to do. Number of hits per at bat, and then the on base percentage, and the WHIP both derive out of that. That just becomes what they are.
All right. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Continue.
I mean, I think that's pretty much all I have to say about it. It's, I guess the thing to add is I've always, when you play and you're looking at your ERA and you're like in third place in ERA, and then you're in 8th or 9th place in WHIP, and that always makes me nervous. Like that, because I think the WHIP is a better approximator of the way your pitching staff is going, and they're going to normalize. If they played enough games, they should end up about the same area, unless you are loaded with guys who give up a lot of home runs with runners on base. Anyway, it's I think WHIP has always been like the better way to evaluate how your pitching staff is doing versus the luck of it.
No, I like that quite a bit. Kind of to these discussions we've been having on these stats, it made me think that I didn't put this on the outline, so I apologize if it takes you off guard, but I think we'll be good here. A lot of these discussion points we're talking about is projections. It's preseason, it's drafting season. Now when we're in season, like what metrics are you looking? Because we're talking smaller samples now. We got to be more reactive. We have to like you hate being that one that sits there and goes, okay, I think this guy's good, but I want to wait a week and make sure he's good, and then you lose out to that player. You'd rather like look at a metric and kind of maybe take you in the right direction. So I'll start with you on this one, Dalton. It can be hitters, pitchers. You can do both, whatever you feel like. What are like the metrics you're looking at in season to maybe help you make a drop and add whatever takes place?
Yeah, aside from saying more of the same, it would be, I'm curious if health is affecting their performance. So I'd look at StatCast and see if they're suddenly hitting the ball less hard, or velocity for pitchers. I mean, that is just obviously no projection system in the world is going to pick up that. So that I'm looking to see if health is affecting their performance. So is there a glaring drop in velocity would be a key one.
All right, what about you, Peter?
Yeah, no, that's for pitchers. That's the biggest one. Also, all of a sudden, the tendency to be walking more guys is a sign of that something's wrong. There's an injury, or something's going wrong there. In season, in a deep league, in an AL only or an NL only, I don't think you really have time to do a lot of analysis before you decide to pick somebody up. It's always on the waiver wire, like there's one errant save, and then that guy goes for 150 fab, no matter who he is, and I think in those cases you just have to get in as fast as you can and see where it takes you. If you have an opening, if you have a hole, you just have to act. And the other part of in season is looking at minor league stats. There are guys who aren't really that lauded or expected in the minor leagues, who are all of a sudden hitting 350 with a bunch of steals and a couple of home runs, and they get called up. I think you have to jump on those guys, even if they weren't in the preseason rankings, because the action is, if you have a spot, you have to take action right away, because things change. Those guys are only 23, 24 years old. It doesn't take a lot to upgrade one's game when you're an obviously talented athlete at that age.
Yeah, Mason Miller was on no one's radar, right, last year. Then suddenly he's throwing 101. It's like, I mean, obviously if he stayed healthy, maybe would have been worth the pickup. So yeah, that's a great call out. That the just prospect lists are great beforehand, but they're often, they're a guessing game on even smaller sample sizes than we're dealing with younger players. So don't give them a hard time when these guys come out of nowhere. So absolutely, it's the young guys that jump. You look at these draft champions drafts that go 50 rounds deep, 15 players, and a lot of good, useful youth, very useful prospects won't even be drafted.
Yep. It's I know for a fact, and some of the ones, if you look at the early ones from last year, like Matt McClain was never drafted. There's a handful of those kind of guys, and you look back going, wow, that could have changed the whole peripheral, like the whole landscape of this league, and it never took place. The minor league stuff too, and it's pretty fun because we have so many tools now that we can use in different websites. I know, like James Anderson, RotoWire, they have minor league stats and metrics up. I know Prospect Live has a ton of stuff. There's a bunch of other sites I'm probably even missing. So it's great, and we've been talking metrics and stats, but there's also a lot of tools that we use, maybe more so for draft season than in season, but maybe I'm missing something here. But between stuff you can purchase, build your own, sheets. The guys have their in-season keeping track of stats stuff they do. We'll start with you on this one, Peter. Do you use any tools throughout the year? Because I don't. I joke that I'm a caveman. I write on paper all the time. I just do my thing. Like you guys talk projections. I understand a lot of it. I could never put it together. It's just not my bag. But Peter, is there any kind of tools you like to utilize to help you out?
I use a notebook.
Yeah, so we're on the same page there.
and this notebook has, here's the list of my waiver pickups. And at the end of the season, I go through and I think just how much carbon I used up writing down the list of all the guys who were available each week. I basically the news wire is the most important thing, like keeping track of who's come up and who's sent down, and then trying to get a best assessment of how to rank the guys who could possibly replace somebody who needs replacing on your team. And those are that's both it's kind of a grunt work type of thing, because you might only have a week or two of stats in the major leagues on guys, and we all often get them wrong. I mean, those waiver pickups often don't amount to anything, but doing the work is, pays off when you get the guy who does make a difference. And I think it's mostly grunt work and paper, and however you're most comfortable. I don't know of any service that, kind of like with projections, algorithms that surface stuff always seem to be kind of obvious. Like they lose a little of the nuance that we bring to it as observers, and the automated projection systems don't do as well as the ones that are massaged by their operator at the end of the day, because there's just too much stuff that we can't quantify in putting it together.
Yeah, makes sense. What about you, Dalton? Do you utilize any kind of like spreadsheets, tools, anything that helps you out?
Well, first of all, I'm old school as well. And during football season, you should see me on Sundays. I take 20 pages of notes trying to watch every single game all at once. And then I later translate that into a column, but very old school with notes on that. For baseball, reading Vlad's Fab column, going on Twitter, absolutely use Twitter and to make a list and curate your favorite writers in baseball, and you can even separate it for baseball, man. It's just such a great conveyor of information. And then Tanner Bell's SGP ranking tool I use before the season. I'm clueless at Excel, but I can figure it out, so anyone can, and that really helps you to put the projections into that, and it converts it into dollar values. So that I absolutely use that for my before the season. You could do that middle of the season too if you wanted to. You could continue doing that.
Yeah, some of those really sharp guys that know how to use Tanner's product, like they've built a whole in-season like you're talking about. They have all kinds of stuff that Brian Slackett was on the main event overall last year. He talks about how he had his weekly updating, like money left, what stats he had, how far he's off percentiles. All it was insane. And I'm like, I wish I could do it. Like, it seems awesome. It probably helps a ton. Probably really does. But like, God, that's wild.
That's the next step. Yeah, it probably helped me as someone who burns 90% of my fab in the first month of the year. Probably would help me a little bit.
Well, I know it would help me focus on the stats and stuff I actually need, instead of like, oh, this looks cool, I need a second baseman. It's like no, it's probably deeper than that. Like, come on, Bubba, figure it out. Those type of things. But I'll just give Nick a plug here, since he's given us the forum to kind of chat and hang out and promote PitchCon. Obviously, they're already over the 10K goal on day 3 of 5, which is really darn impressive. But like, he's got the PLV tool, and I've had the guys on Bench with Bubba a few times to talk about it. Kyle Bland was on the segment right before us. He's basically the mastermind behind so much of it. I will give them a shameless plug, though, because they're developing apps that you can use on your phone to search players and give you all these little like graphs and stuff to look at. Once you learn the meanings of the metric, it's actually pretty neat. And I think that's going to be a wave of the future for so many sites. And that's where I think, like right now, we started out spending most of the show talking metrics. I think if we did the same pod like 5 to no more than 10 years from now, there'll be a lot more tools based. I think it'll be coming down to where we put in our favorite metrics, but then all of a sudden, like, it's almost like spits out everything we're looking for. And it's crazy what we got going on these days.
Props to pitcher list player pages in general. I mean, much information on there. It's awesome.
Yeah, it's the wave of they've put StatCast on it to everything else. I'll never forget writing to a game at FPAS. It's why I tell people, if you can pull it off, it's not even, if you go to FPAS, just the conversations you have out of nowhere. Nick and I writing to a baseball game goes, Bubba, what was the one thing that you'd like to see added this year? And this was a couple years back to the pages. I said, I'll be cool to have StatCast, because I figured there's no way MLB's going to let him do that. Like, what are we doing? And he just laughed, and then he announces it like 2 months later. I'm like, he already had it done, and I'm like, pretty cool stuff, Nick Bullock.
Yeah, I think Major League Baseball deserves a lot of credit for releasing all that data in a way that we can access and manipulate and use and visualize. That they didn't have to do that. The old baseball wouldn't have done it, and it's pretty forward thinking of them.
When you look like NBA, they don't even let you put videos on Twitter. Like, there's like all these like certain things of each league. Baseball, as many faults as I will give that man in charge of baseball, the fact they do share a lot of the stuff with us is pretty darn awesome, all things considered. I guess the last kind of question I do want to ask you here before, if we want to talk a player, if we have any time left, I'll start with you on this one, Peter. I know Dalton mentioned wins as a tiebreaker potentially, but let's have some fun here. If you're looking at two hitters, what metric are you going to as your tiebreaker? Or you can go a couple metrics if you want. That's tough in certain situations. I get it. Like, what's your tiebreaker between two players?
I think it's not a very sophisticated one, but I think I lean towards younger player as that. If I'm looking at a 30-year-old and a 26-year-old, and and they're roughly the same, I'm going to take the younger one as over the older one.
Remember, we don't have to be sophisticated here, Peter. If Geico make commercials for fantasy, I'd be on them. So, caveman style. Dalton, what's your tiebreaker here?
100% stealing his answer. It's a great one. And I, while I'm more willing to draft older, boring veterans in baseball than I am fantasy football, go. And I'm also a sucker for upside, the unknown, the guys who haven't seen it yet. I'm usually taking that just because I swing for the fences. But yeah, the younger guy was a perfect answer. I agree with that. Just in general, more likely to stay healthy.
I lied. I have one more question, but this one's primarily for Dalton. I'm curious Peter's response if he has any on this. You mentioned we could dig into the yellow brick road thing later, so I'm going to ask you about it because we've talked about it before, even when he came on my show. And in these early draft champions drafts, you see like a league-wide yellow brick road around 4 or 5-ish, give or take. It goes pretty heavy. You said you might be changing it. I'm curious, is it due to the glob, kind of a lot of similar pitchers with upside? What's your thoughts on the whole pitching landscape right now?
All right, so I've been just coming out of football mode here. To be fair to me, I'm just starting to get into baseball here. Started a first draft champions league, but my early initial take is about pitcher 6 through 35, maybe even late. I think there's a big tier there, and I'll let others decide between the once you get past the elite. And I think there are a ton of guys with upside with the high K rates. Nick Lodolo, dude. I mean, who cares about? I mean, he might not even be in rotation right now, but look at who cares about his ERA last year. Look at his pedigree. Look at that K rate. And he was just sniped for me because someone jumped him 50 picks right before I was going to get him. But, he was available in round 14 of a 15-team draft. A lot of guys like that. Chris Sale, in early round 10 and those. I mean, I understand injury risk there, but I think there's a lot of upside with pitchers because people worry about last year's performance and like ERA and whatnot. So that's kind of where I've changed twofold. It's just, I think it's too much value later in the pockets for starting pitchers to be spending all my first picks there. And it's tricky though, because, you got to satisfy it all. You still have to go after the relievers in these leagues. And so that's tough, but I've definitely backed off and going after, I might do a yellow brick road between rounds 10 and 20 this year is actually what I might do.
That would be fun to see. Looking forward to seeing that. Peter, when you're doing your draft prep right now, is there any, Dalton mentioned the pitching kind of landscape. Is there anything you're noticing that's standing out this year, maybe different from other years, or an area of the draft you're really enjoying so far when you're kind of breaking down rankings, ADP, draft boards, whatever?
I've made prices and price lists per position. I'm going through them one by one right now. So I've only done catcher. I've only looked at catchers and first base really closely. I'm finding that there's a lot of ADPs on guys like Pasquantino that are just totally where NFBC is totally wrong. There's just no justification for a guy like that going that at 255 or whatever it is. And so I don't have a good answer for that because it's I haven't sat back and looked at compared all the lists together, which is the next step after kind of reconciling how they line up position by position, and then I take a broader look about where to attack. I do agree with Dalton though that the pitching was very much like 14 really great starters, and then a lot of guys with promise, and then a lot of guys in the middle who are risky, and then a lot of guys with promise. And now it's all those guys in the middle are seeping down towards the guys who are with promise, and there's very few of the reliable big guys left at this point.
Yeah, it's a really interesting draft board right now. If you're out there looking at things, that the player pool, especially pitching wise, is quite the I wouldn't say mess, but it's a puzzle quite the puzzle to put together.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
What is the yellow brick road?
Oh, sorry, Dalton. Explain the yellow brick road.
Yeah, in NFBC, it's the pitchers are a yellow sticker, and for a couple of years, I did a strategy where I basically started my draft with 8 straight pitchers. So it was someone, it wasn't me, someone smarter than me came up with the yellow brick road, and I was successful one year, not successful the other, and now away from that. But I think the dynamic was different when I was doing that too. I mean, it has changed, but yeah, I think it'd be really tough to pull that off right now, just given all these really higher upside arms in the middle rounds.
Yep, I like the idea of switching to the middle side. I could see where that could benefit a lot. And it's something you said earlier in the show is like when you started the yellow brick road thing for a couple of years is you got to try something different than the crowd to kind of like differentiate and find an edge type thing. At least that's what I took out of what you were saying there. So now you're trying to tweak it a little bit, see where it goes, and someday it goes completely different. Because I know I'm not speaking too far out of school here. When we were playing like 10, even 15 years ago, pitchers weren't even taken in the first 10 to 15 rounds. It felt like you just didn't take pitchers, and now it's completely flipped on its head. And it's like guys are talking about 2 pitchers. You took 8 pitchers. Like it's just a whole different world now.
That's the thing. Back in the day in your home league, you could get the top 5 pitchers if you went that strategy. You know what I mean? Yeah. If only 10 went, so that you would really jump up, and they contribute more than hitters. Given the dynamics. So, but yeah, totally different ball game now.
Okay, last question, because Nick will be coming in a short, and this is just for fun now. There's no wrong answer. Dalton, if you could have one new metric to help you analyze a player, what would it be?
Oh, man.
Just for fun. We got a minute to kill, so I was like, let's have fun with this one.
I would have to think on that. I don't have a good answer for you. I don't know. I'm waiting for Cardi's projections for pitchers to factor in StatCast. How about that?
There you go. That works. Peter, is there anything because that's the hard part also. There's so much out there already. Like, what else could we possibly get? But then it'll come out and we're like, wow, that's right. That's pretty cool.
So I think one of the most innovative things in the last few years has been Eno and his partners Stuff Plus.
Yeah, that's good.
Which does a very rudimentary job of comparing the location and movement. I don't mean rudimentary in a rudimentary sense, but I have a feeling that there's a lot more that can be done with the figuring out the tunnels where the pitches go and how often they're struck. I don't know how to do that, but it seems to me that there's a lot of data there that aren't being used that aren't being incorporated yet to get to an even better Stuff Plus maybe.
And when are robot umps coming? Can we just bring on the robot umps? I mean, this is ridiculous. We're going to be laughing about this in 5 years from now. It's how archaic it's. Yeah, sorry. Let's get the strike zone correct.
Strike zone correct. They expanded the base paths this year because apparently that was a giant problem. We already shortened the
people like that, right? People complained about it, but no one complaining now, right? Everyone liked the shorter game, right?
That's what they're saying. And the only complaint I have is if you go to a game with some friends, it flies by so much you don't even realize. Like, again, pitcher list. Nick came out, and a bunch of us from the Bay Area met up at the game, and you just next thing you know, it's the 7th inning. It was like, what just happened here? And it just flew through things.
I think that the faster game is for TV, right?
100%.
It's not because when you go to the ballpark, you're sitting outside, the weather's good. You don't care if the game is 2 hours and 15 minutes or 2 hours or 3 hours long. That's like why you're there. But it's a TV that makes a big difference.
Well, there you go. I'll use this to ask about another metric. So we do have a couple more minutes. I was reading the wrong clock because that's how good of a host I am. We were talking about the time of game, and remember all the injuries last year. People were blaming the time of the game stuff, the speed of the game changing, the pitch clock. A year removed from that, do you think we see a lot of the similar situations, or do you think that players have adapted more to this pitch clock? It's open for either one of you guys.
I think it'll take a few years of data to do it. I know there's some pitcher might affect some pitchers more than others. I don't know. This one's kind of up in the air for me, and it absolutely could have an effect, and we won't realize it. There's a few years from now.
Yeah. What about you, Peter? You think there changes?
I think the injuries are they're like a status that people get hurt. Pitchers always got hurt, and they used to get hurt, and then their careers were over. They would throw 400 innings one year, and then they would never pitch again because that's what happened with pitchers. we value the quality pitchers more now. So we pay much more attention to the injuries, and because they can have surgery and come back and sometimes even recover their careers, we've started to take that for granted. But at some point, the stress on the body has got to give way to practicality. And one of those practicalities is saying, okay, you're not pitching 9 innings anymore. You're not pitching 7 innings anymore. You're like, we're going to cut you off after 5 or 4. Like, what's his name? Andy Ashby, mostly pitches 4 innings when he was pitching that 2 years ago with Milwaukee. And I was like, that's it. That's all you can do. We're going to protect you, I think. Anyway, I think pitchers, the game will keep adapting to whatever the situation is. There'll always be pitchers to replace the guys who get hurt, but not getting hurt is a skill in itself, and the quality that pitchers have to foster as well.
Yeah, and that skill, because I do believe it's a skill to not get hurt, especially the pitcher's side of things. Hitters too, because all these guys keep lifting and they pull obliques, injuries we never heard of 10 years ago because of the way they're doing things. But the pitchers, 100%, it's like you want to, like for me, that's maybe a tiebreaker. If this guy's been healthy and throwing X amount of innings year after year compared to this other player, but the flip side, it's like no one's shocked if any pitcher gets hurt now. So do you really want to use that as a tiebreaker in this situation? So it's the yin and the yang of everything we do out here in the fantasy baseball world. Last question, I guess, because we have literally 30 seconds now. But Maryland talk until Nick kicks us out. But I think we made it. I'll say that much. We made it on a fun one here because tools and metrics is an interesting topic, to say the least. Dalton, I know you just got done with football, so you're just digging in. But who was the first player you kind of started digging into, and you just really surprised you?
Well, I don't need to do any digging here, and I know I'm going to sound like a hypocrite because I said my pitching strategy, but I'm all out. I'm all in on Tyler Glasnow this year. He is going to win the Cy Young. I think people are too scared about the injury prone. He was a late bloomer, went over Tommy John, suffered the oblique last year. If they do a 6-man rotation in LA, then it'll be him more likely to stay healthy. But good luck keeping 6 pitchers all healthy at the same time, 100%. To do that. But on the Dodgers, it's sickening as a Giants fan. He's like my favorite player, traded them. He's going to rack up wins. He's so good. I mean, his skills are right there behind Strider, right there. So Glasnow, if you get him in round 3, I'm on board with that.
Yep. If he can somehow put 150 innings together, watch out. I'm with you on that one. What about you, Peter? Like you said, you have catchers and first base. Who was the one that really stood out to you?
Well, I'm going to go a slightly different direction. The guy I really like this year is Michael Garcia, who
nice.
Is looks like a kind of soft middle infielder type guy, but he hits the ball really hard. He's a good defender. He reminds me of Nico Horner, who everybody said nobody was really that high on Nico, and then all of a sudden he became a star. Garcia hits the ball a lot harder than Horner does, and he's my dark horse pick for this year.
And he might lead off, which really boosts that value. So I think that's very enticing. Before we leave, guys, plug your stuff. Peter, go.
Yes, go.
Rotoman.substack.com.
Dalton.
Twitter @DaltonVildon, and sign up at Yahoo Fantasy.
BD Entrek, Bench with Bubba, Bubba in the Blue, much, much more. Nick Pollock.
And